Are these common running gel mistakes causing GI upset in your races? We're going to talk about that today. So it's a common experience impacting up to about 90% of runners. You're cruising along in your race, on pace for your goal, you feel great, until you slow down with stomach cramps or lose time searching for a bathroom or bush. It's a miserable feeling, both physically, but also psychologically as you see your goal slip by. In working with hundreds of runners as a running coach, I've noticed many are quick to blame their gels. You can kind of see where they're coming from. Maybe putting all those carbohydrates on your stomach when running hard is the reason you feel nauseous or like you have to stop at every porta potty. But the issue actually isn't with the running gels themselves. So before you throw out your fueling plan, please watch this video. I'm going to talk about what's actually causing your GI upset and why it's not running gels themselves. Instead, there are some common mistakes that you might be making. There are easy solutions for those mistakes. And I'm going to also talk about how to choose running gels if you have a sensitive stomach. Hi, I'm Laura of Laura Norris Running. I'm an experienced running coach with a master's degree in exercise science. I take research-backed training principles and break them down for you to apply to your own running so that you can train smarter and run faster. Now, one quick disclaimer in today's video. While I did take many sport nutrition classes in my master's studies, I am not a registered dietitian. So everything in this video is broad advice based on the scientific literature. However, if you have specific needs, a recurring issue, I highly recommend you work with a registered sports dietitian for individual nutritional guidance. Now, that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk more about running gels specifically first. Why do we use them? What are they? So gels feature concentrated formulas containing readily available carbohydrates, typically from glucose, fructose, or both. There are usually 20 to 30 grams of carbohydrate per gel. Some newer ones have up to 40 grams of carbohydrate. The formulation of a gel allows you to take in a bunch of carbs at once without chewing. For contrast, one gel contains roughly the same amount of carbs as one banana, but it's a lot easier to carry and eat when you're pushing for a PR. Gels are even easy to take at higher intensities, such as at the end of the race, which is why many runners prefer them to even alternative sport nutrition options. And I want to tell you now, it's not taking in sport nutrition itself that's causing your GI upset. And you don't want to skip these carbs, especially if you want your best race performance. Why is that? Gels provide extra substrate, energy source that your body uses for running. Whether you're running a half marathon, marathon, or ultra, you're burning through a bunch of carbs. And if you don't replace them, you're likely to slow down, hit the wall, and feel pretty miserable. Even in training, running gels serve a purpose on runs longer than about 90 minutes. There's a whole host of physiological effects that can occur from not taking in appropriate nutrition. You have increased muscle damage, which leads to worse recovery, which leads to poor training adaptations. Beyond that, there are some negative health outcomes that you risk, such as low energy availability or low iron stores. But that's a whole other episode in itself. Let's get back to the topic at hand and why it's not your gels that are causing your GI upset. Some of the common culprits for GI upset are actually related to hydration or what you're eating before. So not taking in enough hydration is significantly a culprit. Many running gels actually recommend taking in 4 to 6 ounces of water to help your gut absorb this essentially large carbohydrate bolus. Even with newer gel formulations that we'll talk about in a moment, being underhydrated reduces blood flow to the gut. Lower blood flow means lower gastric emptying. So instead of absorbing all these carbs and using them for energy, they sit on your gut and cause both upper and lower GI symptoms. Another common culprit is eating high fiber or high fat foods before your run. These are slower to digest and therefore will sit on your gut longer. Now, this one deserves a full discussion. We talked about on the Tread Lightly podcast, but low energy availability REDs can present with recurring GI upset as a common symptom. Other common symptoms include nerves, anxiety, medications such as NSAIDs, high caffeine intake, which could be related to your gels, gastrointestinal disorders such as IBS, IBD, or simply not using the right sport nutrition product for you. So it's not likely that taking in your needed carbohydrates is what's causing your GI upset. But let's just say you are making sure that you're hydrating well, that you're eating bland before you run, you aren't popping a bunch of NSAIDs, and you don't have a medical disorder. Please don't give up yet. You can find the right gel that sits well with you on your stomach so that you can fuel well and run that PR. And what should you look for then in a running gel to sit well in your stomach? So if you don't have IBS or IBD or food sensitivities, one thing you want to make sure you look for is called multiple transportable carbohydrates. So especially if you're taking in high amounts, like the recommended 60 to 90 grams of carbs per hour, you need to make sure that you have multiple carbohydrates because they transport out of your gut differently. This is why so many new gels have a higher ratio of fructose to glucose. Glucose and fructose are both monosaccharides, meaning they are the simplest form of carbohydrate, really easy for your body to use as quick energy while running. They can be quickly absorbed and sent eventually to the working muscles to convert into energy, which is what we want from a running gel. These two monosaccharides use different gut transporters. Glucose uses SGLT1 and fructose uses GLUT5. Now the names aren't really important, it's what they do. Each of these carries out those carbohydrates from your gut. And so if you have, say, 60 grams from all glucose, you could overwhelm that gut transporter. But if it's spread across two forms, two gut transporters, neither gets overwhelmed and everything gets transported out of your gut. Nothing is sitting on your gut, making you feel irritated. That's why a lot of these newer high-carb gels have up to a 1 to 0.8 glucose to fructose ratio, and why they're so well tolerated even with a high carbohydrate dose. Another thing to look for are hydrogels or isotonic gels. These are running gels that can be taken without water and still broken down well in the gut. These include Morden, Precision, Science and Sport, and Never Second. Now, with the hydrogels, there is some debate, and I think it's important to touch on. A 2022 study in Medicine, Science and Sports found that GI symptoms were less severe when a hydrogel was compared to a non-hydrogel. However, the placebo had the same effects on GI symptoms as the hydrogel. So there's no definitive conclusion. Other studies have seen no significant difference, and they use small sample sizes. But it's certainly something to consider. I have heard athletes report that hydrogels help them. Now, these isotonic and hydrogels don't mean you can skip out on hydration. Like I talked about earlier, dehydration will lead to poor performance and GI upset. What these gels are giving you is a more easily digestible gel and often a more tolerable texture. Now, there are certain ingredients you want to look out for to avoid GI upset. Non-nutritive sweeteners are a known GI irritant for many runners, especially if they're in a gel that you're taking 6 or 8 of over the course of a marathon. And believe it or not, even though non-nutritive sweeteners provide no substrate, they are present in some running gels. So be wary of any ingredients ending in ITOL. Now, finally, if you've done all these things and you're like, I still have issues, and you tend to also have issues outside of running, maybe you have IBS or IBD or food sensitivities, we might want to look into this theory on FODMAPs and fructose as an irritant. This might contradict what I said earlier about multiple transporters, and this is why it is different for every runner based on their baseline. So again, for most runners, you want fructose in your gel to have those different carb transporters. By no means am I saying to avoid fructose in gel if you don't have symptoms. There's a lot of nuance around this, and again, we're breaking this down for more sensitive athletes. So the whole theory is that these FODMAPs foods, which fructose falls under, are poorly absorbed in the small intestine and can ferment in the large intestine. FODMAPs might cause changes in osmotic pressure in the intestines and cause malabsorption of carbohydrates, both of which can lead to GI upset. For sensitive individuals, small amounts are generally not irritating. However, if you're taking several gels in a relatively short amount of time, such as a marathon or ultramarathon, then theoretically large doses of fructose could cause irritation for these sensitive athletes. This is theory, and I really want to emphasize it. There is some newer research to support it. A 2019 review in Sports Medicine found that high amounts of FODMAP consumption during exercise may lead to symptoms like bloating and gas in sensitive individuals. A 2023 systematic review reached a similar conclusion and also found that low FODMAP intake around a race might be part of a strategy for reducing symptoms in sensitive individuals, along with gut training. A 2024 research article trialed a low fructose gel that used mostly maltodextrin, and they administered it to athletes every 20 minutes over a 2-hour run, 62 grams of carbs per hour. They measured breath hydrogen levels and saw that these athletes did not have severe malabsorption, and any reported GI symptoms were mild using this low fructose gel. So if you tend to experience symptoms with FODMAPs in daily life, which is common for people with IBS, IBD, you may want to consider low fructose gels. These include Huma gels, particularly their berry flavors, or untapped gels. And while not gels, many Scratch Labs products, including their chews and their super high carb drink, are formulated with a different ratio of glucose to fructose to be gentler on the gut while still letting you get in a high amount of carbohydrates. And I want to emphasize here, this is just theory. If you have questions specifically about that, reach out to a doctor or sports dietitian. It's just how individual this stuff is. I've seen athletes do great with Morden. I've seen athletes have GI upset with Morden. It's very individual. So one final consideration is caffeine. Caffeine is a known performance enhancer because it's a stimulant. However, as a stimulant, very large doses can cause other things to move along quickly, such as having to use the bathroom or having lower GI issues. The threshold is different for everyone because there is individual impact on genes and how you respond and metabolize to caffeine. For some runners, they can go up to the higher thresholds of, say, 6 milligrams per kilogram of body weight and be fine. Others will start experiencing GI issues at lower amounts. So it's important to look over your gels, see how much caffeine is in them, and then account for any caffeine, coffee, tea, etc. you're taking in before the race, any that might be in your sport drink, etc. If you do notice these issues, or if you notice you're always reaching for caffeinated gels, maybe try reserving the caffeinated gels for just once or twice in a race. Time them 45 to 60 minutes out from when you really need them. But overall, making sure that not every gel is caffeinated will probably help. And that's why it's so important to trial and error your products. Don't wait till race day to try out your gel. That is the last mistake that people make. And I understand you might pick up what's on course or be nervous, but make sure you can tolerate what's on course. Make sure you've practiced your fueling strategy throughout training. Practice taking your gels on long runs, on race pace workouts, and even take one race week to keep your gut cells turning over. But if you go through all of these things, you make sure you're well hydrated, you are taking a gel that sits well for you, and you've practiced your fueling in training, you can reduce your GI upset, you can tolerate your running gels, and you can run that faster race. Thank you so much for listening. I want to hear from you in the comments. Share with me, what's your favorite running gel? Which one sits really well with you? Help out other viewers in the comments too if they're curious. And please subscribe and like. Happy running.